you like circa the beginning of COVID. I was like, well, COVID-19 has nothing on me putting emergency in my orange juice.
Wait. What?
All right.
Ever since then, I've been like, with the flavor, what is it?
Thank you. I needed that.
That's beautiful.
Danielle's going.
She's here.
Yeah, I'm am I right?
That's just perfect for the opening of this.
Hello.
Yeah, I don't have a.
Yeah,
I don't have a cover underneath that.
we need Autumn thumping the table GIF part 2.
Yep. I'll try to make the bass boost on that epic.
Just deep fry the crap.
Yeah. Okay.
Fried.
We are gonna have a bit of background noise, but it should be fine.
At least it's not cornhole. This time.
And also,
Yeah,
at least
at least
they're
it's not
not really next to the table anymore, because that was very loud.
Alright, Danielle's looking for Calais because we do need Shelby and Calais reacting to Poiemauthors part 2.
Somebody's phone is vibrating, guys.
It was mine.
Fascinating. Spam call.
Denied.
I'm gonna make sure my phone is actually recording, because that'll be a shame.
It's on here of my phone.
I was going to ask if there was a video.
I have it on vibrate.
There is one.
I think there are 2
I
cameras.
mean, if mine goes off at all, we'll just hear like a
It's an
very soft.
improvement.
Is it?
Maybe. I don't know. Dustin?
Well, let's go.
We'll find out.
What happened to Danielle?
She went to
She's
find.
finding Calais.
She's right there. In the tent.
Danielle!
There's Calais.
Calais! Calais! We need you! I will say, I've drank out of the
Alright, Shelby, you're carrying.
and it is way harder to drink out of this because this has a handle.
This is the nerd table.
About writing.
Talking about nerd stuff.
Welcome back to Nerds with Words. This is the
This is your captain speaking.
3rd one of these. This is your king speaking.
You are the
Thank you.
captain.
3rd in person, 4th overall.
This is true. And I did attempt to record the last one we did with you. Kind of Willa. I screen recorded it, and all I got later was an hour and 17 minutes of nothing.
Hilarious.
No audio.
We muted the mic.
Completely muted. I
Are
don't
you
know.
using Mac?
No, I was using my phone.
Okay.
I don't have a MacBook.
So many cult memes out of that.
Dude, so many and bunk beds.
And bunk beds.
And bunk bed.
We talked about
Cults and
bunk
bunk
beds
beds.
for
That was
like
the whole.
20 minutes.
That was the whole talk. Everybody had a bunk bed story, man.
It was great.
Do I have a bunk bed story?
Do you?
I don't know.
You have how? With the number of siblings you have, I'm sure you have. Someone has a bunk bed story.
slept on a bunk bed for 20 years of my life, so I feel like I should have one.
There you go. That's a story in and of itself. That tells you
Extract
so
one
much.
For the end of the hour, surely.
In our bedroom growing up, we had 2 bunk beds next to each other, and people would roll off the top, so someone would roll off and someone would roll on top of them.
Oh dear.
I think my favorite bunk bed story was that Elijah's is, so we have 2 in the boys' room, and Elijah's is a little taller than Samuel's, and they'd get on them and play Beanie Baby Wars, but Elijah could always get Samuel better than Samuel could get Elijah because he had the high ground.
It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground.
Yeah, the reason that the bunk beds got brought up was because I was asking someone if they had written a bunk bed scene in a
That was
project
me.
they were working on. Yeah.
What is it just a scene that takes place on a bunk bed?
No, well, I was asking if there was a bunk bed or if the bed being talked about was not, in fact, a bunk bed. And I was disappointed. It's not a bunk bed.
It's not a bunk bed.
But
It was a scene in a dorm room. It was like, is there a bunk bed? Is there a bunk bed? It needs to know. It's like,
I feel like
I wasn't thinking about bunk beds when I wrote it. Darn.
More to every person who's ever lived
Could be.
and
I
slept
don't think
in a
there's
bunk
a.
bed,
I don't
so
think there's a dorm room in draft 2.
It's not
Unfortunately.
that big of a deal, but I wanted to know if it was, and it wasn't. So I need the takeaway was that I need to write a book that includes a lot of bunk bed scenes.
That's actually about a bunk bed and its life through the generations.
I'm just writing a children's book that's actually for adults, but it looks like a children's
I'm
book.
gonna attempt. I will have to attempt now to put a bunk bed into the future middle grade story about Oxenfree. I'm gonna have to write at some point because Oxenfree is the middle grade protagonist. We haven't seen him yet, but he has the potential.
And he gets a bunk bed.
It's a bunk bed because he is a middle grade protagonist. Those have to have bunk beds.
Truly.
Anyway,
So we were talking about having the people who have not introduced themselves at the talks before to introduce themselves.
we should probably all introduce ourselves just so they don't feel singled out. Welcome, by the way. Welcome, fresh
By
meats.
the way, Annie's life story.
I'm excited, but a little scared.
That's how it should be.
Okay, so you go
Welcome to your doom.
All right, T-Ray. You put yourself in the hot seat.
Oh, okay.
Who are you and what do you do?
I'm T-Ray. I'm an electrical engineer, and I write theology and practical biblical interpretation how-tos.
Oh, that's very cool.
Nice.
That is very cool.
Non-fiction, so I may be a little bit of a black sheep here, but
That's okay. We need some more diversity in the table at this point.
Life is a story.
This is true.
true.
This is true.
Yeah.
Being made by a creator who is a storyteller, all that we do is in fact a story. Which is why applicable to all of life, something like that. Like,
And we're all writing about different parts of the greater story. You're just writing it more literally.
Anyway,
Sam.
player proceeds to that guy's left, or whatever it is.
Perfect. I'm Sam. I do write, but it's mostly just for myself. I tend to write essays, just breaking down life situations because I like to analyze them way too much. And aside from that, I am an artist. I do photography. I am currently a watercolor.
Yes.
I doodle and such. And I occasionally dabble in music.
So, T-Ray, congratulations, you're not the only nonfiction writer at the table.
music is non-fiction.
Well, it can be.
Essays.
Autobiography is in fact nonfiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Depends on how delusional you are. Welcome.
I'm Ashley. I have been writing for as long as I can remember, pretty much. And currently, I have settled on novel writing for the most part.
Very
So
cool.
I write Christian fiction.
Any specific genre?
It's usually set in medieval times, and yeah, it's like I don't know, like adventure more, but very centered on Christ. And I like it.
Very nice.
I'm Kayla, and I like to write. I've experimented with almost a lot of genres. So historical fiction, fantasy, mystery, science fiction. So none of them are very advanced. So yeah, I dabble.
That's right.
I think the overarching, like broad term for that, I think that's usually speculative fiction. Yes,
I believe so, yeah.
probably. I think.
I'm Justin. I write a little bit of everything. I do a lot of personal essays on my blog. I do some creative writing. I've been doing a lot of art YouTube videos, which often requires a lot of scripting. I spent a while this summer writing a bunch of scenes from a trilogy of books I'll probably never finish. But I've been working on some longer writing projects too.
I am Elijah. I'm Elijah. I write primarily, well, I dabble into epic fantasy, but I primarily write fantasy. I'm not going to go into the difference between those two.
One is normal, one is
Yeah. I love mythologies, so some of my stuff is inspired from that. Some of it isn't, but I do like to incorporate religious aspects into my writing, especially creating my own religions in it.
very cool.
Yeah. Autumn?
I'm Autumn. I've been here a while. I have been telling stories since I knew what a story, before I knew what a story was, and I've been writing since I was 14. Writing seriously since I was 14. I will write basically any genre, provided that it serves the narrative I'm trying to write. So if a narrative is like, and the characters I'm trying to talk about are better suited by X genre than Y genre, I'll work on it. I'll try and work with X genre. I am really big into anthropology and sociology, so I love world building and like trying to figure out how the people in a story build the culture. I am a really big fan of fantasy and epic fantasy for that purpose. Particularly, like I love world building and seeing how culture and character affect each other. But right now I'm working in contemporary fiction. I finished a manuscript in January, and I just started working on the second draft in July. No? Jude. One of those. Danielle betrayed us, so we'll get back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. We'll circle back.
We'll circle back
for you.
Pepper.
Anyway, I am Bethany. Hello. I write primarily fantasy stuff because writing things where the rules of real life do not necessarily apply is very appealing to me. So currently that involves self-publishing a trilogy of fantasy comedy books. And I hopefully want to do a related novella after that because there's a character I literally could not involve in the main series that I want to write about. So yeah, that's my current project. I'm also working on bachelor project Skyboats. Complicated to describe in fewer than 18 sentences.
Fantasy.
Possession. Big, complicated, many found family, islands in the sky. Full stop. Yes,
Brian Jakes
but that's
coded.
not like that's a poor way of representing the book because it makes it sound like a very different genre. Anyway, that is me, Rachel's turn.
I'm Rachel. I mostly write speculative fiction. I've done quite a few retellings, but I'm like writing a lot of different stuff. I have a non-fiction book idea kicking around the back of my mind, but I don't think I have the skill to write it yet, so it's just gonna stay there for now. And I'm currently working on querying my first book to hopefully get traditionally published.
So cool.
Circling back to Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I write high fantasy with low magic, and I am currently working on finishing the publication process for my second book, which is, I've been saying, people have told me the writing style feels like Juliette Marillier, who I do not recommend because she's a druidist and it comes out in her writing. However, her writing is beautiful, and between that and Lawhead. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
So we have a bunch of novices and then actual accomplishment, completion.
Why my accomplishment? Look at you. Published books.
Hey, you're almost done with a trilogy, so.
Yes, ma'am.
Almost done is where I wish I was.
I'm tired. You have all three written.
I do,
One of them needs more drafts.
And book 3 is finally starting to get somewhere. I'm so glad.
This fist bump is for you.
Creative panic has greatly lessened since our last meeting.
That's so real. I've started just describing my creative process as that as the great Bethany Meyer once said, I exist in a constant state of creative panic, but I'm having a good time.
Yes.
I'm really embracing the King's Hall motto: make haste slowly.
The number of things I want to be writing at any given time is like
Many.
the number of brain cells I have to be able to devote to that.
None.
How would you guys describe your writing process when it comes to after you have an idea and you kind of know what you want it to look like? The amount of time that you set aside to write it, do you just like, I'm gonna write 1,000 things today, and then for the few months you just let it go, or do you like do it 15 minutes a day?
Bold of you to assume that we know what it's going to look like after we have an idea.
Look, the process over here is we have the idea. We think we know what the idea is. We put 23,000 words of trying to figure it out into a Google Doc, and then we do 4 more drafts of writing the actual story, still trying to figure out what it is until we arrive at a conclusion, and then we publish the book.
This is called pantsing.
I do not pants. I just
I'm very opposite. I am very planner focused. I really like to work through like processes to get the story idea polished up, and then write say 30 minutes every day or like 1,000 words every day, and then just keep working through it till it's done.
What about you two, Ray?
This is gonna sound crazy, but it's probably nice. I covered up all the walls in my room with whiteboard, and
That's awesome.
I write out all my ideas on whiteboards, and I'll adjust them and like try to make them connect. And
You have all the red yarn, like that Charlie Day meme.
I have not started putting I've started pinning paper to it, so I'm close to conspiracy theory
because
level.
she has the yarn.
You got the yarn.
The yarn. It's gray. It's the one that it's the ball of yarn that I didn't want to use
I'm proud of
in
you.
crochet projects.
Then you can pretend you're not as crazy as me.
He said, he said, I might be psychotic, and then was like, normal information.
Glad I'm in good company.
Yes.
I've had people over who have told me that I'm like the dude from Transformers 2 who's just like drawing everything everywhere.
Nah. The number of people at this table that have had come into my house and like fanboy over the conspiracy wall of my story skeleton.
I love that wall.
I want a
It's
story
simple,
skeleton.
delightful. If I
Yeah,
had
so you're
a
in good
single
company.
empty wall in my trailer, I would have one. But it being a trailer, everything is condensed.
I keep all mine in Scrivener. It's very handy.
I can't do it with screens. My brain is too big to be contained by a laptop.
Yes.
Also, you need the pen. I personally
5,000 sticky notes.
have learned that I cannot plot a book until I have let it stew for at least 2 to 3 years. So usually the initial idea I put in a notebook, and if I know it's a story that I specifically am going to write someday, I'll give it its own notebook. So once a couple of threads have kind of come together and there's at least a groundwork for a plot and a groundwork for a character, I give it its own notebook. And then once that happens, as I get the other pieces throughout time, I add them like scenes and characters and things to the notebook. And then once I'm actually ready to sit down and draft it, once I have the time slot open up and I have the last pieces of the plot click into place so that I have a point A and a point B and a point C, then I sit down and actually start the process of drafting. After doing all the character work, obviously. But
So yours is very methodical, but it's not very structured.
yes,
Yeah.
I am a pantser, but I'm a pantser with a little bit of guideline. Actually, a lot of guideline.
It's like if stories were soups, you're kind of like a stone stew experience
Yes,
going
yes, I
on,
am.
where you just throw things into a pot and it takes forever to fit.
And then once it's there, you're like, that was a soup. It wasn't just some kind of weird
Throwing things into a pot and hoping for the best.
Yes.
So what does being a pantser mean for the
It means
uninitiated?
that, okay, so
You fly by the seat
plotters-
of your pants.
Yeah. Well,
Ah.
okay, but it also is so my stories are very character based, which means that I'm pulling character motivations the entire time, which means that I don't map out books scene by scene, because I want to pull character strings and see what happens, and I'm learning about the characters a lot of times as I'm going. Like I have their framework when I begin, and I have their background when I begin, but how that interacts with each other, a lot of times I'm learning in the first draft. So if I was to plot the entire book, by the time I finished writing it, the plot would be entirely different, so it would be a waste of time. And I find, for me at least, it kills creativity. If I plot a book, it's dead.
Whereas I'm a plotter, so I have to have an outline. I have 10, 20,000 word outlines where I write down each scene, what happens in it, the main points, character goals, everything before I start. And then I can just write the scene, and it actually unlocks my creativity to have that guideline already there. Because if I just try to write a scene, I'm like, I got nothing. But if I already have decided, okay, this is a scene where this happens, and so I can get get it to do that, then it works better for me. And I am not opposed to changing it. If I'm writing it and it's going a different direction, I will follow that direction because if it feels right. But it gives me somewhere to start.
So having that framework kind of helps you imagine things that can go in it.
Yes.
And adjust if you need to as you go.
So the outlining process for me is very imaginative because I'm just kind of thinking about what the story could be and then kind of starting to shape it down into that form.
I think it's kind of act I'm sitting between both of you right now. Sorry, my voice is going, so if the whole table can't hear me, I'm very sorry. Orange juice hasn't saved me yet.
It's picking you up, so you're good.
Thank God. Listen to the sound of my orange juice scrape across the table. No, but it's fairly apt that I'm sitting in the middle because honestly, my method is fairly a blend of that. Like I do very much mean when I'm saying that I have to type everything into the computer to figure out what my thoughts even are, but I have to have the thoughts to start the story. So the reason I have the 23,000 word lore doc is because I was like, I want to know what's happening before I start the story, but I don't know what it is yet, and the actual thoughts inside my brain are not sentence shaped. So having it come out into the computer where I can type at the speed of my brain making the thoughts helps get it all out in the open. I figure out what the structure actually is, and then I start writing it down, and then the second draft happens, and I have this wonderful second draft jinx. It always happens. This happens every time. I finish the first draft, I realize the things that I should have wanted in the first draft, try to add them in, push it too far, make the story horrible, and have to start from scratch. So I've only had it not happen one time, and off the top of my head, right now, I cannot remember which story it was. But every single second draft, I pushed it too hard, trying to change it in a big way, and then realized it was actually like underlying things that needed to be changed the whole time.
I feel like that's what's happening with Deep 2 is like I wrote Deep 1 just like kind of in a blur, and then I come back and it's like, okay, now we have to do it all the same way except 5 steps to the left. And with a completely new cast. Which is great.
I feel like that's starting to happen with mine. Thankfully, I don't think I have to rewrite the entire story, just
That's
change
nice.
some things around.
That's
So
nice.
I actually wanted to talk to you after we're done.
Yeah, Deep 2 is turning into an entirely new manuscript. It's like, okay, we have all the things that happened in the first draft, and we're going to try and replicate that, but completely different. Completely different.
First draft is only good for getting the vibes out there.
There were vibes. We have established not even the capital V vibes. No, they're the second draft. They're in the second draft. They were the lowercase v vibes in the first draft, but there were a lot of those, as my alpha readers can testify. The number of people who have texted me, follow-ups like, I have been crying for 5 chapters.
I was reading it,
It was great.
and I had a friend come over, and she wanted to watch a movie with my siblings and I was like, mid-chapter, and I was like, I'll be out at the end of this chapter. Finished reading the chapter and was like, I can't stop here! And then by the time I had finished the following chapter, which was a big deal, I come out like all teary-eyed, and I'm like, okay, so we want to watch the movie now.
It's been a great time hearing back from alpha readers, actually. But I'm similar to Bethany in that I really need to know what is going on before it gets onto the page. But for at least my one completed manuscript so far, it's just like, I kind of have an idea of the plot points I want to hit, and most of them involve character decisions that are like, I know what Providence is to put in place to make them into that decision-making mode. But while I'm kind of working all that out, it doesn't go in a Google Doc. I just play the entire story in my head like a really long movie for like a solid 3 months before I can start putting things on the page.
Okay, here's a pop question for all of you guys. When you read and write, do you see things in your head as a movie, or is it more still pictures and like vague memories?
Movie, obviously.
It sometimes is memories. So sometimes I'll be reading something and someone will reference something that I'm familiar with. And I essentially like make up my own picture, my own world of it based off of the memory. So Autumn referenced someone that we knew, and like a location, and immediately the rest of reading Alpha, like her first draft, was visualizing that location. Even if that wasn't how she visualized it, that's immediately what came to mind.
Interesting.
Because I did reference, I was so lazy with Deep 1, okay? I was so lazy. It was like, I'm gonna just dump all my hyperfixations and everything, like all things I've visited before and kind of know the shape of, so I don't have to do any like legwork for this particular draft, because it was really just venting for 60,000 words.
That's what first drafts are for.
It was amazing. It was amazing. I wrote that in 3 months. I was like, I don't know how I did that. I will never be able to do it again. But it was great. And now I have to like actually do legwork. We'll see how that goes. We're like 5,000 words in so far.
Could you say your question again?
Which question?
About the
So when reading a book, I've had this conversation with a couple people, and I find it really interesting because some people actually see books and things in their head as an acted movie, and some people see it more as like pictures and like more what memories look like in your head. So like for me, it's more what memories look like in your head, and still pictures and that kind of stuff. And so like I could describe to you exactly what's going on, but I'm not going to picture it in my head as like a movie at all.
So that's actually, and I'll give you a second. That's actually really common where neurologically there's like a scale of how well you're able to visualize things. Like some people can only visualize like words. You say apple, they see the word apple.
I found like that.
Yeah, and there's people who can say like the outline of an apple or like the impression of an apple, and there's people who can like 3D render the entire apple in their heads and rotate it.
I'm rotating an apple in my head right now.
Yeah. The people who can't, it's called aphantasia.
Which is sad. And
Is
see,
it?
I
really
can
is.
taste the apple and smell the apple, and I can tell you what flavor of apple, but I will not picture it the same way that you guys do.
Wow. I can do all three.
I've
Like, I can
discussed
do all.
before how I can see smell in my head.
You see what now?
I've see how something is spelled based on how people pronounce it. I can hear the difference between a G and a J. If people have a funny spelling name, I can usually hear it. And I've only ever met one other person who could do that, and both of us had never met another person who could do that, and we just like nerded out about it for like 30 minutes. But no, like so one of Naomi's characters from the previous drafts, her name was Jen, and I was like, is it short for Genevieve? Because I can hear the G. I know it's not J. So what is the difference? It's very weird, but it's very convenient for me spelling things correctly usually.
That's fascinating.
I want to test you on this later with the weird names I have in Sparrow.
Yes.
I really want to test it.
No, but like as far as visualization when writing goes, I never really thought about it. I never really thought about it this way because generally all of my visualizations in my head, I'm very slowly transitioning out of white room
Traveling hat.
visualization for writing books because it took me a really long time to be able to visualize the locations they were in, unless it was shot on location of someplace I'd actually been before. Interesting. However, I do know that all of mine do play out like a movie because actually it's kind of a shot for shot kind of thing, and it's actually very tricky to figure out how I want to write it in a way that the effect comes off how I want it. I'm like, no, I can't continue the POV here. I need a chapter split or something because it's a cut to black moment. We absolutely must have a split here, and it affects the way that I write the prose. And also, as an additional side note, before I hand the floor back to the rest of you because I know I'm being a hog, your writing, you say yours are more like seeing through somebody's eyes, like playing like memories, right? And yours is closer to a movie, yes?
Cinematography, man.
They read that way. Interesting. The prose reads that way. Because when you're writing, you're physically writing down what you see in your head. So it's actually very fascinating because of course that translates. Because yours is very much closer to like a direct POV versus thinking about like what I've read of Dave. It's much more like watching like a Netflix show.
Actually, though, kind of. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, and also the way that you split your chapters with being character like focused helps with that. So you know what's the important and like I don't know. It's sectioned in a way that feels like that.
Also, let it be known that there's a beach episode at the end.
I haven't read it yet. I haven't finished it.
There is a beach episode though. Look forward to the beach episode.
It really is.
Beach episode.
My happy beach epilogue. We've gone through many, many awful things. We're gonna go to the beach. Let the salt water wash our tears away.
Real.
What about the rest of you guys? When you write, what do you see?
When I write and when I read recreationally are different.
Interesting.
Yeah, so when I'm just reading a book that I really like, it's mostly like memories, still pictures, but when I'm like either reading something critically, like maybe I don't really like it, or maybe I really like it and I want to think, oh, how
Imitate.
like getting more in depth with the scene, or how I write my own stories. It's like, okay, I'm thinking scene by scene, focusing on the characters and like having, I don't know, focusing on certain things that I think create, like, help flesh out the tension in the scene or something, that like an arrow quivering from just hitting a tree and missing someone. Like, I can picture that scene as a moose.
I can see it. I can see it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Watch the camera
really
pan.
Yeah, and everyone's like,
No, like because of the visual aspect, like for a while I was like, would it be better just to be a movie director because I know how this goes? And I was like, should I just go into film? And then I was like, wait, no. Then I don't have complete control because then there's other people and I have to tell them what to do. Oh gracious, that's too much work. No, I'm gonna write books.
That's so real.
You can tell them what to do on paper.
Yes,
They can't say no.
I control
I'm
exactly
Supreme
how everything
Commander of
looks
this
at all
vessel.
times
Yes.
on the paper. You can't do that directly.
Correct.
Could be a film dictator.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think for me it's kind of weird. I think it depends on what's inspiring what I'm writing at the time. 'Cause if it's like drawing upon my memories, then I'll be seeing it more as like memories. But if I'm being inspired by a movie or something, then I'll see it more as a movie in my head. Whether it's my own writing or reading somebody else's, like, you know, they're reminding me of something from a film or from my own writing. But what you say is kind of funny because I'm kind of the opposite, where I always wanted to be a writer, and I just started making videos like, why didn't I think of this sooner? It's actually
But you are director, cinematographer, editor,
Yes.
all the things.
by choice.
So, can I say both?
You can't say both.
Yeah.
Of course you can say both. No, absolutely good. Not.
Yeah.
Too much to ask for both.
I think it entirely depends on the scene that I'm writing or reading.
Interesting.
Because whenever it's like a fight scene, that I exclusively watch in like a cinematography sort of way. But if it's just solely dialogue, it is pictures, or I'm just reading the words. And that goes the same thing with my writing. I think I had written a scene where one of my characters is like jumping across building from building, and that entire thing I had to imagine in my head as a visual thing before I could write it down.
Aladdin, let's go.
And that's why it my beta reader enjoyed it so well, was because it was very descriptive in a more cinematography way.
That's
but
really cool.
my dialogue, the only visual things you get is when I say they frown or they raise an eyebrow, and that's very picture based.
Interesting.
Yeah, I realize, like, in combat, if I'm reading some, like, action scene, like, if there is specifically violence or running, I visualize it like a film or a video. Whereas dialogue is almost as though I'm sitting in the room with the people talking. Like, that's how it's visualized for me. I don't necessarily know how it's written. Right, well, it's felt not necessarily like a film, but more like a memory of, like, it is a little bit choppy. It's just kind of vague images. I'm not seeing their mouths move, if you will, but I can still visualize, like, where they are in the space.
Hence why you asked about the bunk bed.
Yeah.
What about you, Ashley?
So for me, it's like a movie, but it's not crystal clear. Like, I never quite see faces or anything. Like,
Interesting.
I don't like. Okay, so if I know what something looks like, I can picture it in my mind. But it's like for characters in the books, like, I can see the scenes and what's happening, but it, like, I don't have like this perfect image of what they're supposed to look like or anything.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you guys build characters, do you have a visual representation for their face and their build and all of that? Because I don't know that I've ever, now that's mostly speaking from, I've never succeeded much when it came to writing fiction, but anytime even reading fiction, I've never been able to visualize characters.
People keep asking me for visual references from characters from D, and I'm like, especially for draft 2, it's like, do we have to?
Yeah.
Like,
It's
like there's an impression in my head, but like,
It's like I can tell you what they look like, but I like their hair color, eye color, all these things. But I don't have like this perfect image of like a face.
I will have a follow-up question. Let's keep going.
I do have, that's actually one of the reasons I have a really hard time with Pinterest boards that are like specific, because I can give you the vibes for the book, but when it comes to specific characters, I have like the details of the shape of their nose and like their jawline and all that kind of stuff in my head for exactly what they look like, which is also a reason that sometimes, at least when I was originally starting, I struggled with fan art. Because when people do pictures of your characters and you're like, that's fantastic and beautiful, and I'm like so honored, I'm gonna like cry, but also their nose, they can't get the nose right. So
Superimpose a GIF of that over the feed.
Yeah.
So like that goes for all the side characters, it goes for animals, it goes for like literally everything, like every creature in the story, I will have a literal picture of them in my head when I'm writing them. But
I feel like I'm kind of in the middle. Like, I know the the different shapes of the jaws and everything, but I couldn't like compose all of it into a face that's it doesn't look like a real person. It looks like a drawing, like like almost like a cartoon.
Caricature. Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, it's hard for me to create faces out of nothing. Like whenever I do that, it just becomes generic. But I do have. I do have images of the folks in my current project. I do have pictures of what they're supposed to look like. But a lot of the times when I'm imagining them in my head, even with the women, they have my face.
It's that one episode of Doctor Who where everyone turns into the Master. But it's Elijah.
I don't know why it's like that. It's just, I guess my face is the one that I know the best, so it's just
That is fair.
the one
That
that
is fair.
is slapped on there.
Do all the women have the facial hair?
No.
Like very
least I hope
shaved
not. I
and
don't-
bearded Elijah's.
I don't really imagine myself with facial hair.
Interesting. Maybe is it a
So-
new development for you? The facial hair, is it a new development mentally? Like you haven't quite got used to it yet?
Maybe. I can imagine my characters with facial hair, but I'm thinking of Keslin right now. He has a scruffy beard, but I'm imagining him with my face, and I pretty much clean shaven.
Interesting. That's so fascinating.
You imagine the base
he's
model of your
blonde.
face.
He's blonde. He has a scruffy beard.
But with your face.
But he's right now a brunette with a clean shaven in my mind right now.
So someday, whenever you're famous, this isn't the follow-up. This is a follow-up to the follow-up. But someday, when you're famous, I would like for one of your fans to do a fan art with like an epic scene of one of your books and just have everybody with your face. That would be gold. The original follow-up, though, was that there have been studies done that have shown that humans are incapable of making up a face.
Yeah.
They can only take pieces from other faces they've seen and put them together, but they are incapable of like creating something without the inspiration, like specific inspirations of faces. Otherwise, it stays vague and nebulous, and it's never actually a thing. And that includes in dreams. You're always using real faces.
But that, yeah.
Which makes them creepier. But anyway,
So many people have dreamed about it who I've barely exchanged 2 words with at work. It's like, why am I dreaming about you of all people?
Yeah. It's like you see a face that you've never seen before in a dream, and you're like, when have I seen this person? What?
Yeah.
Background extra from the movie you watched. It's like somebody in the movie.
What, T-Ray?
I strongly believe that is because only God can create character, and your character in real life is most strongly presented through your face.
Yeah.
And so he's given us the ability to write fiction and other characters and things like that, but not the ability to actually
imitate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because like so much of character work is not really creating a whole human. It's creating an impression of a human.
Right.
And the most strongest characteristics to communicate an idea towards your reader. You're trying to write an archetype more than you're trying to write a whole person.
Right.
The same as when you're creating a world, you're creating an impression of the world with bits and pieces of the things
For
that
we
are
see
important
through
to
glass
you.
darkly,
Yeah.
but then face to face.
Amen.
Because you cannot create
A world.
a separate entire universe in existence and history and
No matter
future
how
and past.
detailed.
No matter how much
Exactly.
fun we have with it.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think as far as visualizing faces goes, I always think I can visualize their face until I go to find like a face claim for the character, and then I realize I don't know what they look like at all, and I have like 5 tabs up of like different
Only 5?
actors, and they all look like different people, and I'm like, oh,
What does it all mean?
actually know.
I
don't
feel
know
like
anything.
that would be one place I might say like an AI generated image might be handy because you could tweak it entirely to be what you wanted.
But you can also do that with Photoshop.
No, but like I'm not very good at Photoshop.
Like that's the biggest struggle I'm having with my characters from Deep 2 is the second female lead, the first female lead, second female lead, one of the two like most important women in the book is like she has such a distinctive profile and presentation. It's like, where do you get that? You don't get a lot of really cool Asian women with buzz cuts in the world. It's not really it's not really stylish. So you're looking up pictures like, there's nothing. There's nothing for a 5'10" Chinese woman with a buzz cut. There's still somehow looks really feminine. Darn it.
I had a very hard time finding anyone I liked on Pinterest for like my character of my Wonderland trilogy. It's just like none of them were right. I have one that I like, but still like.
Yeah, I run into that same issue trying to find images of people that actually look like how I want my characters to look.
It's a real struggle. It's a real struggle.
Sometimes it's so hard to actually find people that
that don't look like
that
models.
look like your characters.
That look like
Yeah, I'm
normal
like,
people.
gosh darn it, they're all too handsome. I want them to look like a funky little creature. Come on.
The guy that I have for Kesma is way too handsome.
It's a real struggle.
So what we need is a filter that just scruffifies characters.
The true use of AI.
Scruffification.
ChatGPT, please scruffify this actor
Make
for
him
me.
slightly ugly.
ChatGPT is like, what are you talking about, you little weirdo?
Scrub off all the the makeup and the filtering and the Photoshop and give us a real
airbrush.
person. Yeah.
Unyassification.
Yes, that's the word. De-yassify.
I do visualize characters a lot because I am also on like the movie side, but my big thing is I like to really focus in on clothing because I'm so
Because you are a fashionista.
I'm very passionate about fashion and the way what things it tells us in the stories. So I will very often. I describe people's outfits a lot because I'm trying to tell you something about them through that.
Yes, because human expression and the way humans work and all the things that go into what makes a person.
Yeah, like I have
Arts
my
and culture.
Queen of Hearts character. Like she's very powerful and stuff, but she almost always wears dresses because she considers them like the power of femininity is something she wields. So I think she wears
loaded.
pants a few times, maybe for like some of the more battle scenes. So it's a little more practical, but she always is. And then in the second book, she goes to like Earth by mistake. She's just over here like, what is this fashion trash? Like,
That's fantastic.
Polyester?
Look at the seams on this.
Polyester.
Get out of the seams.
It ain't linen, I don't want it.
Says the woman wearing a linen shirt.
Well, like the way characters dress is 100% determined by who they are as a person. People who... Thank you, Gabe. People who wear like a lot of accessories and are like super like expressive with how they dress. There's a reason for that, and people who dress really, there are people who dress really plain on purpose because they're insecure about like being very, very expressive, or because they literally don't have the brain space to be deciding a lot of things first thing in the morning, or people who have like they'll have like a bracelet that really doesn't look like anything else that they wear, and it doesn't really make sense up until they tell you that is from their grandmother who passed away, who took care of them for like 16 years when they were a child. Like there's so much storytelling just in the way that they look, and that is why I'm working so freaking hard to make my Skyboat's characters more dressy than all of the people in Scorch, because the Scorch outfits wear perhaps a pants, perhaps a shirt, mayhap a belt. I like really that's as good as it gets in Scorch.
This shirt has holes for wings.
Or does it?
I've been thinking about shirts, how shirts with would work with wings recently. I don't know why.
Oh, it's
like,
all over Pinterest. You just have to
it's
look
so
for it on
complicated.
Pinterest.
It really is.
I was thinking about it very recently.
No, angel culture is all over Pinterest. You can look up all kinds of fantasy like hypothetical art
Bird folk.
for that.
Yeah, I was drawing this like fairy and like it was like sideways, and I was like, wait, how did I do the back on this? There's so much wing back here.
Try to get it in the camera.
So my main ideas for wing shirts, these are partly Pinterest and partly personal speculation. You can, like, for fashion, you could have like an extremely low back, but like not everybody's gonna want that, and that's not always gonna be a look. Yeah, let me go straight into battle with zero anything covering my entire spine. Sure, that sounds great.
Hard pass.
Yeah. Pinterest's main idea is to have just like basically like stretchy armholes in the back. You put the wings through either first or last when you're putting the shirt on.
The amount of wing that.
However, my main argument is
here.
there should be buttons at the top of the wing holes. You can put the shirt on, you pull the wings through, and then you button on top so that your shirt isn't just flapping all over the place. Because the shoulders are going to be the shirt are going to be pretty useless.
Could do like
otherwise
back lacing.
Okay,
like,
consider.
or
Consider.
stitchery military sort of or Regency.
We reject modern principles of what the piecing for a modern shirt is supposed to be, and like centerpiece, no seams in the back around the wings, side pieces, front piece that goes on last. So you put the centerpiece on.
Do you?
I've done more world building than I've done already. I cannot insert it at this point.
This is just me thinking.
I think of have like a buttons on the sides, and the back opens up so that it wraps around.
See, when I had a culture that was very similar to yours in my original world concept that I had 8 years ago, and I tossed it out like 2 years ago because it didn't fit. But when I had them, I actually did a whole thing about their fashion and what it looked like and how it worked. And I landed on wrap shirts because you can wrap them a whole bunch of different angles and however you want to, and it could also tell you a lot about a character based on how they wrap theirs, but you could do it around wings pretty easily and still maintain protection.
Togas and stuff like that could probably be pretty handy because they just wrap and drape and you could move it around the wings.
And do whatever you want.
And especially for
Reject
women,
modernity.
that's way more fluid. So because we're all built different, it's easier to transfer from person to person than it is to say, well, you know, Danielle can wear one shirt that I can't wear. It's not going to transfer. And so the structure of the shirt itself needs to be different.
Yeah.
You also have things that you guys have seen like tearaway pants, right? And there's a better, more sanctified use for me if you've got huge
A more
wings.
sanctified use for tearaway pants.
Yeah, the concept. You've got huge wings or other appendages coming out of places where humans don't have them. You can have one half come on and then put another half on, and like buttons here.
That is
Sliced
true.
in half.
I'm ready as fast as I can.
Oh goodness, we were talking about visualization, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
At one point.
Approximately 25 minutes ago.
Before we were talking about serifs and how their wings work.
Well, specifically character visualization.
Yeah.
So that's kind of we were talking about outlining and pantsing a lot, and then moving on to like how you visualize your characters. And for me, it's kind of weird. When I have a project, it'll usually be quite uneven in different areas. Like I'll outline parts of the plot, and I'll like plan out the visuals of some characters like very clearly because of what spark inspired them that was really important. But I won't do it for all characters. I won't plan out like all of the story. So some characters are like extremely well planned out, and then others I find through writing the story. And similar for parts of the plot, or even like the world building. I'll world build like some parts of the world really in depth, and other parts will just kind of discover as I'm writing it. So it's kind of a combination.
You are a plantser.
You just toss a bunch of seeds into a garden to see what comes
Fly by
up.
the seat of your plan.
I'm kind of like a jack of all trades person, which is great if you're trying to like make your own films or work at a small company where you need to wear a lot of hats. But I think it's part of the reason why I haven't really written full-length novels is because I don't have the focus to stick on writing one book for a really long amount of time. I think if I did write a full long book, I'd have to like autumn, like do it in 3 months because I can't hold to it for that long.
Or you can work on like 5 at a time. That's a bad idea. Don't do that.
I was thinking about that, but it could be fun though.
Yes, he didn't.
Oh my.
There was one point in my teens I was doing 5 at once. Eventually you reach a point where you realize the things you want to write about at a given time are all the same, and so all of them have the same red-haired character that's kind of just about the same person across the multiverse, and you're like, oh, okay.
You have a redhead character in your fantasy book? What?
Not anymore.
No, I was joking because everyone makes fun of fantasy books for having redhead characters. They're like,
Because redheads are beautiful, that's why.
they are. Also, they're
They can only be
it's
common
an
in
interesting
fantasy.
color.
And they're rarer, genetically speaking. It's more likely to be a unique character because
So they are.
everyone has brown hair and brown eyes, but not everyone has red hair.
I have a redhead character, but he's not in fantasy. He's in my superhero YA book, and he does has octopus powers. So here we are.
I have one redhead character in my book, but she's only in the prologue and she doesn't show up again.
And that's accurate to like.
Real life.
Okay, last time I looked at the statistics, there are fewer people with red hair than there are with autism. I'm shaking your hand, Samantha, because there's 2 of us and no redheads at this table.
Mine's red if I grow it out.
Okay, fair enough. There's 2 of us and 1 of you. We still outnumber you.
Also, it's
still
funny,
mapping.
you said something about someone said something about redheads being in the prologue, and that is more accurate to real life because I think there are so many redheads in my childhood and not so many in my real life.
Well, I know 3 at this camp, to be fair. There's T-Ray kind of,
Ethan for real.
Ethan, and Caleb off the top of my head, at least 3.
Yeah.
See, I have a
Blonde, though.
sister. Well, he's strawberry blonde.
Yeah,
so
Strawberry.
and it's more red sometimes. But my sister Phoebe was a redhead and then is now strawberry blonde. My dad's beard is red. My older brother's beard is red. So I am surrounded by red.
And
beard
Victoria's
heads.
got like low light, bright red.
She does, which is weird, and I don't know where it came
So
from.
strange.
No idea where it came
Incredible though.
The mind boggles.
When you said redhead woman in the prologue, I immediately put your face on her, and then my brain was immediately like, oh, redhead in Elijah's book, woman, prologue, long hair, Elijah.
You know, she's one of the few characters I actually don't put my face on.
Oh.
Your fan art is incorrect, Danielle.
I think it's because when I initially wrote her, I did describe her a bit more than how she is currently.
Okay.
So that's probably why I don't have my face on her right now.
You thought about it too much.
I also can't make fun of authors who put redheads in fantasy books because my first book, the main characters are redhead, and the second book in Sparrow's series, one of the 2 main characters is a redhead. But to be fair, she was a redhead long before I wrote Frost or even had the idea for Frost. So
You take it back. I do have a redhead fictional character because I forgot my one from my Peter Pan retelling, which was a gender
There
bended.
has to be a
Because I
redhead
gender
Peter
bended,
Pan.
so my female Peter Pan was redhead, obviously. so-
Ginger.
that's fantastic.
I feel like it's weird to make fun of fantasy for having redheads because I'm sure there's plenty of people with brown hair also, and yet people are like, let's pick on this one specific
gonna talk
character.
about
This just
all the,
seems
like-
a very strange thing to point out.
About
I
the
have no
blue-eyed
idea
males
people
in
do it.
romance.
Yes. The guys whose eyes are always blue, like the depths of the sea, or the calm before a storm.
Spare me.
They're never brown like the depths of the earth.
we don't romanticize brown eyes enough in fiction.
Well,
let's
then
be
there's
real.
Twilight, where his eyes were brown as something brown. So there's that. You can just. I haven't actually read it. Qualification. I just saw someone had taken a picture of that line on the page in the book that was
it
like
from Twilight?
it was from Twilight.
Oh,
And
no.
his eyes were brown as a brown thing, or like as a pit of brown. It was like literally
Just brown.
They were as brown
Brown
as
is brown.
brown.
As brown as brown could be.
Brown is something else that was also brown.
There's so many better ways to describe brown eyes than
Truly.
something brown. Just
Truly.
look up pretty brown things. I don't know.
All things
It was
good
like
and warm and
4
right
in the
are brown.
morning.
Amen.
Or
I saved that a while ago because someone was knocking on their brown eyes. I was like,
of a perfect cup.
Take it back.
Brown is a color
Coffee,
that binds
chocolate.
scenes together. It's
Yeah.
not a color that stands out on its own, so it kind of
But-
lends itself to accentuating it.
but it is one of the most naturally
Yeah,
brown is one of the things in nature that is the most full of life.
yeah.
Well, and what's
God likes
incredible-
brown.
God
He
likes
uses
brown.
a lot of brown.
Like you could
All
really,
over the
if
place.
you had like
Amen.
a
On
garden
us.
While life is not one constant
It's like
stream
his
of
eyes are brown,
high
like
points and
perfectly
outstanding moments,
composted
life is a constantly bound
soil or
together.
something like
mud
that. Like to her, that would be
Yeah.
like the most romantic.
A lot of
thing.
food's brown.
Tree bark and
Dirt.
mud. The best dirt for growing things in is like that really, really dark, rich brown.
Yes,
Reddish
and I
brown.
love seeing here's my thing. I love seeing because we all have wildly different brown eyes. Even though you look at someone, you're like they're just brown. But if you look close at people's eyes,
You know
there's
that?
magic in
You
there.
did a study on those for a while.
I was about to say, I actually still have an album full of just
Is it the one from
close-up
the Poiemauthors?
pictures. Nope. Close-up pictures of people's irises, and I have 2 of your sisters in it.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, because
That sounds
I
surprising.
had almost 100 when I stopped because it was just very fascinating to see the different patterns in people's irises, but also the different shades that you
Mine are
can't
hazel.
see most of the time.
Green.
It's really funny. My favorite story when it comes to people's brown eyes is my boyfriend's nephew.
Okay.
My boyfriend would go up to him and be like, "What color are my eyes?" And he would just go, "Dark."
So real.
So
Okay. Okay, you finish.
Okay. So I work on the AV team at my church, and one day I was just sitting back in my chair with the wall that separates the booth from the rest of them, like blocking off everyone's torsos, and all I saw was people's hair. And I will say the color palette for people's hair is very interesting.
Startlingly diverse.
It's so many different shades
Nuance.
of brown. Even the red is like a different shade of brown, which is very interesting.
Can I have my mini soapbox? very many soapboxes. I know why people dye their hair, and I appreciate that because people enjoy doing that. It makes me sad, however, because the way that God's color palettes work and the way that He designed people and how all their facial features work together to create something beautiful is so stunning. And like the individual nuanced shades in their hair and how that interacts with their eyes and how that interacts with their skin tones and how that interacts with the colors they enjoy. It's so cool.
That was the most photographer thing you could have said.
I agree with that only because I'm super vain and although I really want to dye my hair, I couldn't without covering up all my gray hair. It was like, I couldn't do that to myself.
Cover up your signs of wisdom.
Hopefully not false advertising.
You got wisdom. You got Jesus. It grows.
All right, follow-up question for talking about visualization and characters, because I've been thinking about this and we've gotten on enough dovetails that I feel like I can justify asking a question now. When you're writing descriptions of people and places, how do you integrate that into the rest of the story? Because while I'm working on my narrative, it's like, there's no time to talk about what someone's eyes look like. I'm trying to tell a daggum story and I don't want to take someone out of it. And this is caused many complaints from my alpha readers.
On it because I'm the kind of just like, all right, let's stop talking and let's talk about the room now.
How do we do this?
All right, everybody pause.
Okay. So I have ever so many things to say about this, because this is something that matters very deeply to me. I absolutely hate full stopping the entire narrative exclusively to just be like, okay, and this is what this looks like, because that is the wrong way of doing it. What you are chronicling, what you are recording a person's experience. Writing down the story is recording these people's experience. They're experiencing those visual details as they walk through the scene, so it should be 100% relative to the words you're writing, the things that they are thinking, their narrative, what they're noticing in the room.
What they're synthesizing.
Which, actually, one of my favorite... Okay, so... No, one of my favorite descriptions, like what really got me thinking about this, it was just like one of these like horrible dystopian books that was just written in a future full of experiments and blah blah blah, whatever. The two of these characters escape from the experiment, experience the regular world for the first time, and the guy character and the girl character go and get all cleaned up and everything by the people that they meet there. And when he sees the girl again, they put some makeup on her, and all he could think, like, there was no description of like, oh, she was wearing eyeliner and mascara, like, oh, her eyes were like darker, like because this was him thinking these thoughts. All that he was able to say it, the only way he was able to say it is that her face looked kind of colored in and more defined and sharper in a way that like he wasn't used to, and her face just looked more saturated than it usually did, and it was unfamiliar. And I was like, oh, so the way you describe other characters, the way you describe the things that they see is through the thoughts that they think. So you can have such fun, funky little descriptions because that's how the characters think. Preach. And it's beautiful. And Archer is very fun for that because Archer is just a funky little creature.
And full of spite.
Who's full of spite and rage, and I love him. And, there's this part in book 2. He never wears shoes. He absolutely hates shoes. He's just a little rogue. He loves running around and, causing trouble and doing whatever the heck he wants. And his father, who's a character, is like, you are going to attend this event with us, and you are going to wear this outfit. You can wear only this because this is the only thing that is acceptable for you to wear, and it has shoes. And he's like, I'm going to be trapped in these leather prisons for hours. But yeah, basically all that to say that the way you write a description is not full stop, now let's talk about this bedroom. It's the character walks into this room and you are chronicling what they experience there and what they see and what that means to them. And that's how you incorporate it in the narrative in a way that is meaningful and interesting.
It kind of depends on what the focus of your story is. Like, if it's a character-focused story, then absolutely. Like, you're focusing on what the characters think about it. But sometimes the overarching story, like, sometimes the plot is the focus, and it's the story. And so, I don't know. I really like world building, and I really like being descriptive. So that's, like, I don't think it's necessarily full stopping to say, all right, let's take a break from where they're walking right now and describe what they're seeing, like, but not as though they're seeing it. Like, like I don't know. I like being very
I feel like
descriptive
it's
in
like
my
almost like an
writing.
establishing shot for the scene sometimes.
Yes.
For me, like it's like, all right,
Yeah,
let's
true.
take a moment to look at where we are. Just a quick glimpse, so you have an idea.
Like
We can add more details later as we interact throughout the scene, but I want to,
This is the space, now put characters in.
because I want to start you with, here's where we are.
And the camera pans in as Treebeard brings Mary Pippin into his own house, and you just kind of, the camera leans back and takes in the whole thing, and then you go zero back in on Treebeard bringing Mary Pippin into
Yeah, it's
Welling
like,
Hall is the name.
A movie doesn't show you what the character is at. Sometimes it gets very confusing because you're like, wait, where did that piece of furniture come from?
I feel like we grouse about Tolkien's density of prose, but having like
It's good.
as a guy who likes a lot of Tolkien, I feel like he does a really good job of bringing the scene into the scene.
Also,
I love his descriptions.
hot topic. Most of his descriptions relate back to the world that he's building because he was building the mythology,
Yes,
Yeah.
which means that they all relate back to his original
it all
purpose for writing
contributes
the
to
book.
the narrative.
So if you know that that's
Actively
what he's
contributes to the
doing,
narrative.
it's fantastic.
Kind of like walking around a museum with a tour guide.
Yes,
I bet Tolkien would have been a great
it's like
tour
a
guide.
boat tour.
Yeah.
He just gets
Literally.
stuck though. He would like get to like one thing and then he'd go off on some tangent for
You're
like
so
2
excited
hours
about
while
this
you're
whole-
standing there like, can we look at the next one?
And do not go on an arboreum tour with Professor Tolkien.
I saw something on Pinterest that claimed that J.R.R. Tolkien, like so many people, if they took walks with him, would get so annoyed because he would
Stop and look at every tree.
for 20 minutes. And
Do not go to an arboreum with
that
Professor
person.
Tolkien. You are that person in a suit. The number of tree appreciation shots in your travel Instagram stories, it's like,
Yes.
because they're
that's
a really
great
great
tree.
tree.
They
It's a
are.
great tree. There was a tree outside my Airbnb mobile when I went and stayed with some friends. It was a solid 150 years old.
Oh, dude.
It was enormous. It was like growing out of the sidewalk, and you're like,
Do you remember the tree in our front yard?
yeah,
I love that tree.
it's a great tree.
We have a 450-year-old oak tree in our front yard,
Whoa.
the oldest one in our county,
Wow.
and it is my favorite. I love that tree.
You should come, Bethany. You should come. Alright, that's interesting. So the way you're saying it, because I'm not really good at writing descriptions yet, because I'm not really practicing it.
Shisa is writing beautiful, eloquent descriptions that I was, frankly, taking gigantic yummy bites out of the entire time I was reading Eve. Anyway, carry on.
Because I write character-based fiction, but also because I'm bad at taking in scenery unless I'm sitting down and thinking about it. Like, I could describe the room, but I'm not really thinking about the room while I'm in it. I'm kind of like zeroed in on what's right in front of me, and sometimes not even that, considering the number of times I nearly bumped into T right earlier. So that it's pertaining to the way you process information, and then expanding the way you process this information in order to better synthesize and communicate it. Thank you. Thank you. That was also great perspective. Carry on. I'm
That being because, it's kind of the thing of if there's something in the water bottle, if you squeeze the water bottle, it comes out of the water bottle. The way that you think, the things that are already in your brain are coming out onto the page because you're essentially taking a nice splash of your brain and putting it inside of a book.
very much so in Deep's case.
And like that's why I really enjoy reading other people's writing, because I am psychoanalyzing the entire time. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this after I've already read so many of your works, but I am deeply psychoanalyzing the entire time, and we'll talk to you about it later. But people,
Taking all of my writing back.
yeah,
It's too late.
Too late. You can't stop me.
Now you guys know what
You
will
already
happen if
been
you ever
profiled.
let Bethany read it.
Just made a throwaway comment somewhere towards the second third at the end of Deep. It was like something about if these random details are so pertinent into your life, I worry about the rest of the book.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Yes,
love
but-
Deep too.
but like people write about what's already inside their brains. The ideas come from the things that are already inside of their brains, and so when I'm reading other people's work, when I notice the same motifs keep coming up again and again, I'm like, this is something that is important to you. This is something that you think about quite often, since it comes up so frequently, and it's extremely fascinating to me. And that's why everybody's narrative voice is different, because the inside of everybody's brain, it sounds different and looks different. Literally, the way that we were just talking about, the way that we see things inside of our head, the way we visualize an apple is all different. And so the way we write about the apple is
Gonna be
wildly
different.
different and important in different ways. And that's on the diversity of God's people and how we all reflect the image of God in different ways.
Amen. I want to read your work now because I'm really curious about how what you were just talking about, the way that you write descriptions, pans out in your work, because it sounds
It does sound interesting.
I don't know. I really like considering buildings and trees and like just really
so much
thinking about
going on
why was this house built this way? Why did they use these shapes? I love looking at houses.
Residential architecture and the history of residential architecture and why it does what it does. It's so great.
Don't show out on my Sims builds.
I'm not looking.
Like, you don't want to see the house.
She shows me her Sims builds so that I can be upset about them.
I just built them because they look
Psychological
pretty.
abuse.
I build them for the vibes. And I look at them for the house codes, and I go, "Oh gracious! Why is the window touching the corner?"
Oh, gracious.
One thing, because the Sims is very hard to get the windows in.
This I understand, but I can still be mad.
I will not apologize though for putting the toilet on one side and the sink over here and then the bathtub over here. So
It does look prettier.
Anyway.
That's like me whenever I'm playing Minecraft. It's like it looks
The
pretty
vibes.
on the outside, but when you go in, it's like
It's like the backside
glass
of a
is right
piece of
there, right
embroidery.
next to it.
Yeah, it's like, oh.
Like, it's like what?
I get so
that's why
frustrated playing
architecture is
Minecraft because it needs to be perfectly planned out and it needs to make sense, but it doesn't. So
They need to add sideways slabs. Come on, Mojang.
For real though.
Thank you.
Ashley,
Get bequeathed.
So has anyone ever written a book in which you have had a dream and you incorporate that into your book?
Not yet.
Not in a long
It's
time.
it's in the books.
So one of my books is actually based entirely off of 2 dreams that I had. So
Interesting.
Cool. Thing is,
mine are too weird.
I kind of stopped dreaming a while ago. I every so often I have another dream, but I'm
For so often I have another dream.
every so often that was unsettling. Let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming of just being
No, the
unconscious
number
for a
of
while.
times I woke up, I was psychologically tortured by my own subconscious for like a solid 8 hours
No, this
on
is
Monday
why I
night.
prefer to not dream because stuff like that happens. I don't
Anyway.
I don't dream often enough that it's actually kind of unsettling if I do have a dream. My theory on that is that A, my imagination is getting enough exercise during the day, and B, dreams, one of the main purposes of dreams is to make sure that your brain can work out any unconscious thinking that you haven't worked out when you're conscious of your frequently having nightmares about like the same thing over and over again. It's because there's some kind of thing that's stressing you in real life that you're not particularly addressing, and I try very, very hard to be very aware of what my problems are. So my theory is that I don't dream because of those 2 things, but there could be something wildly different going on. But yeah, I don't dream very much, and I haven't been able to write about something that I dreamed about in 15 years.
Yikes.
My brain does interesting things sometimes.
I've never written about a dream, but I had a dream once that I did write down because it was very interesting to me. It was like these dudes that went into this giant prison and then they got out of it, but then someone had to go back for some reason, I don't remember why, and but you could only go into prison once. And just that was very interesting to me.
Once you get out of prison, you can murder whoever you want. They won't put you back.
I don't know. I assume if you were to write it would have to be a magical prison of some kind for some very specific reason, but
Or that they'd have to put him somewhere else or something.
or maybe it wouldn't be a prison after all. But that was the dream.
The one story dream I had was actually I was sick and I was kind of delirious because I was really feverish. So I had a dream, Doc Brown from Back to the Future. Yeah, I think it was basically Doc Brown and some other people on an airplane, and it was gonna crash, and it was storming, and I don't remember. But I did write it down.
Sounds like a really nice idea for a story. It's the kernel of
okay, how did we get to this position?
Yeah.
There are
Probably
scenes
wondering
that
how
I
I
dream that I
entered
think to
into
myself,
this
I want to write that into a story, and I have a handful of those, but they haven't gotten any proper airtime yet.
Mine are more just hints of elements of dreams. Occasionally, I have 2 or 3 on back burner parts of other books that were just a piece of a scene of a dream that I was like, oh, that specific thing. But I also almost never remember if I have a dream. So
I remember the vibes of the dream or just the regular feelings, but I don't remember the details, which is very unfortunate because I'm trying to There was one dream that I had that I wanted to write down because it kind of inspired a story, and I can't remember what it is.
That's not
Very
You keep
unfortunate.
the notebook or the phone next to the bed, and then you have the idea in the middle of the night, and you it's just wide enough that you can.
I have a
Put
few
some
friends
kind
who
of
do
banner.
that, and then they look back on their dreams and they're like, I don't want to think about that. Never mind.
That tears out the page.
I think recently I had a dream where I created an entire song, which I don't do. I am not musically capable, but I wrote an entire song that made sense. And I don't know what it is.
One time I had a dream that was pretty much like a movie, and it even had like end credits, I think, with the song playing. And when I woke up, I could remember the chorus of the song, but then I forgot it.
That's sad.
Bethany, I like what you said about dreams being the way the brain processes problems and solving them.
It's very real.
Actually really helpful for me
yeah.
because I will have dreams where I'm either in a debate or in a discussion or giving a lecture, and that gives me time to create my arguments and field counter arguments and stuff like that. And
Well, precisely, because that's what you're thinking about when you're conscious. So your brain's like, well, we still have this problem. We could just keep like turning over and over again while we're asleep and come up with something in the morning.
I love that they do that because then, like, I feel like my time is not wasted when I'm asleep. I should be working on a project.
Your time is not wasted when you're resting as God commands.
Sometimes they're really specific. While my Roman Catholic friends are sleeping, they don't know I'm dreaming about ways to argue with them.
Write that down, Smee, write it down.
Typical Protestant theologian.
And sometimes it's not even like literal, like something specific you know what's going on. Sometimes it's just like a metaphor for your subconscious, creating a metaphor for something you're dealing with. When I was in my mid-teens, my family was going through a pretty turbulent situation, and I had the same dream for a solid year and a half, where I would be in the back of a car and there was no one in the driver's seat, and we were hurtling down the interstate, and I had to climb out of the back seat into the front seat and take the wheel so I wouldn't go off the road or die or something like that. Solid year and a half.
God, I'm taking the wheel.
I had those dreams all the time for years as a kid too.
The other on the other side though, I have been dreaming about my job on and off for the last like 6 months. Nope, several months. And on Monday night it was just 8 hours of looking at the same terribly packed parcel. Until I woke. I was dozing and thinking about it. Still, I was like, "This is wrong. This is wrong." And I need a vacation.
I have still
I call in
stress
sick.
dreams about working retail. My gosh, like it's like in the dreams I always like have to go back for like reasons, and then there's like horrible people, and I have to stock the shelves, and I'm like, no.
I can't get away from that. I come home, I go to bed, and I still see that daggum conveyor belt and all the daggum boxes that ain't been packed
Like
right.
I can't. You dream about the job, and you're like, I can't leave the job. That's stressing me out because it follows me.
I clocked out 3 hours ago, but I'm looking at a 12 parcel order that all has to go on the truck. I'm supposed to be clocking out right now. No, wait. I clocked out 3 hours ago and I'm sleeping. Why are we doing this? I can't run a conveyor belt from my bed.
Can't run a conveyor belt from my bed.
I'm lying down.
I briefly worked in fast food. It was like 2 weeks. And every night, I would fall asleep and I would have a dream about getting someone's order wrong. And so I'd walk up to the table and be like, I forgot your spoon. Or I'd walk up to the table and be like, this is the wrong... Like, there's nothing right here. Or I'd be standing at the register and they'd be asking me for something. I'd be like, it's not on the menu. It's nowhere here. What do you mean you want that?
That's just a typical fast
I
food
don't
experience.
want that sandwich. So anyway, I quit the job.
Dreams. Subconscious.
Great times.
Great times.
Or not.
God
depending
gave
on
us
the
those
dream.
for a reason. It just sometimes you gotta wonder why.
Why this one specifically?
Lord, why did I dream about my teeth falling out for 3 months? I haven't lost a tooth since I was like 12, and that was the last one.
The reason we dream to get rid of the stuff we can't think about during the day is so that it doesn't just stay stuck in the brain.
You'd be surprised.
Because things staying stuck in the brain is kind of what causes massive other issues.
This is known.
It is. Yes. Bottling it then gives us bodily illnesses, and then, yeah.
Or neurophysiological time bombs.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. we have to let the things work themselves out, or else, in some way or another, or else, if you don't get it out, it stays in, and it stays in, and it festers. Mm-hmm. So we dream.
So we write fiction.
And we write fiction. Let's go.
It's like dreaming of being awake.
Except, at least in this scenario, bad things happen in the fiction, and other people suffer, but not me. So
I have
You
to
can
write
control
it.
the outcome, whereas in a lot of dreams, you don't really get to
unless you're
control the
lucid
outcome.
dreaming, although I don't lucid dream.
And to be fair,
Yeah, only special people do that.
to be fair, I also suffer when I'm writing fiction.
I don't want to.
Not with emotions, though.
Yes.
Yes,
Not
with
me.
emotions.
Okay, this is fair. You have
Put
different
the emotions on the
problems.
page for the rest of you.
You have different problems. I have written a scene with tears streaming down my face. It's like,
Okay, that's fair. Because the end of Skyboats had me bawling. I was like, oh crap, not an emotion.
And he's like, I don't have feelings.
Oh, not an emotion.
Bro, put that back where we found it. We don't need that.
I think that where I give for much of help me, so help me.
So help me and cut.
I've gotten emotional a few times writing some scenes.
It
It's like,
happens.
when you have to hurt a character in a certain way to
Oh no, I enjoy that.
to have another
Sadist.
character who's causing it to realize stuff. It's like it's really hard to do that to the character, but you got to do it.
Do you tend? I'm really curious. When you guys are writing or reading something that makes you emotional, what is it about it that makes you cry? Like for me, usually it's being able to relate to a character in a situation. Like Autumn was writing, there were a lot of things that I was crying at that I was like, oh, I understand that. That's bad. Or like the other day, it was even just like I was thinking about a friend, and thinking about that friend had me crying because like A, I related, and B, I felt like safe with that person, and so I was hurting and I knew they were hurting, and it was like sort of an emotional bond to that. But I also know that some people just cry because they're sad that people are hurting. I'm really not
that's
that
the part
person.
that doesn't really happen for me.
I'm not excited.
If something is
but,
happening that like I specifically can relate to, which I mean, to be fair, is a good portion of what I write about. But if something is something I can relate to and it's just so extremely painful, sure, I do get upset about it. However, like the actual empathy part is somewhat separated, particularly since there's like a level of catharsis to it. So
yes.
in a way, it does kind of make me feel better instead of worse. But no, the stuff that usually gets me actually emotional is when there's just such a enormous burden of like hope and betterness.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's incredible. It's so huge. I was talking about this with Martha the other day, and like I lost the ability to have words about the thing I was trying to say because it was big and important, and I was so full of big feelings. But no, it's actually the good things that make me upset more than the bad things. Actually.
Amen.
So I have to really lean into the beach episode at the end of Deep 2 now.
No, not the beach episode.
So, I honestly, for me, in every book that has ever made me cry, it has been because something was either beautiful or because it was right. Like when something is right and you're like, this is like
When it's
Payoff.
right at last.
yes, right at last, and
Yes.
it hit like the end until we have faces. That was one of the first books that ever made me cry, and I've read it every year since then, and it's made me cry every year since then, and that's like 8 times. That book, when it hits, and it's something like, all has been wrong for the entire story. Everything's been wrong, everything's been bad. Her father was a terrible person. She's never had anybody who's truly loved her. She's destroyed all the friendships she's ever been part of. And then she stands before God at the end and has her answer. And it like...
So your duck face is just great.
It's just like... It's so good, and it's such a good reminder of like those parts in scripture when they're like talking about the new heavens and the new earth, and it like hits, and it's just like, this is right, and like this is what we're looking forward to, and this is what all of it's culminating into, and that is the correct ending of the story of history. Like that is the book that God's writing, has that ending where everything is right.
Yeah.
And when you're reading scripture and things are, you know deep down in your soul that they are true and they are correct and they are the way the world was founded, like those things Those things.
I just have some book recommendations for what you're describing. Marilyn Robinson's Gilead and Leela are both really good that way for me. But for the people who like the darker, sadder books, she also has 2 really good ones, Jack and Home, that are really, really good that way.
Who was the author?
Marilyn Robinson.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to the crying question, which is also a crying question.
I'm not finished yet.
Oh,
There are
okay.
more crying answers.
There are more crying answers.
Time to cry.
There is something wrong with me. We know this. I have an uncannily elevated sense of empathy, I think it is, where I get rapidly overwhelmed with people's emotions. Like, I can sense them, and, like, they are way too much. So, like, if someone's crying, especially in the pulpit, I have to, like, I feel the need to leave, to get out before my brain snaps in half. But also that means when I'm sitting there with the Word doc and the people in my book, it's like, I am feeling everything that they're feeling. Like, I can, like, the sense of that, especially is in the case of Dee, because that's the thing I wrote most recently, that the anguish, it's like, it's mine now. It's theirs, so now it's mine. I am in pain now. Someone send help.
Yeah.
So yes.
I think that's how it is with me too. Like, I have always enjoyed like studying people, and like I can tell people's emotions and like what like different things. So I think when I'm reading or watching a movie or something, it's like I am like hyper focused and like
You're right there with
into
them.
the character. And so like if they start crying or something, like I know like what they're feeling in that moment.
It's
and
terrible.
So, yeah.
It's terrible.
I watched.
I can't look at people kiss because it's like they're having such a good time. It's too much.
You write that one down, Bethany.
Me and Hillary were laughing about this the other night. Okay, they're having a very good time picking on me, but also being very conscientious.
What's funny
Billy
about
and
that is
Henry
how
are
many
direct
marriages there were this year.
Funny.
And also the newborn children, like,
Yeah.
so like, baby Gloria was at church this week, and it's like, there's so much feelings in that room. I couldn't stay there. It's great. It's a happy. This is a great happy thing. I can't do this. That's too much feeling.
I think that's exactly what it is.
That's too much.
My follow-up question,
Okay.
which I think actually what you just said is sort of leading into when you cry, specifically when consuming literature or other art, but just in general, does it feel like a relief, like cathartic, or does it feel like an expansion and more and too much of whatever the original feeling is?
Usually it's the second one.
For me, it's the second.
However, I did cry like
Definitely-
6 times
it's
at work the other
definitely
weekend.
not,
That was like,
getting rid of an emotion. Yeah, it's definitely not getting rid of an emotion. It's more like installing it.
I think it
Honestly.
depends.
It feels like embracing the actual emotions that are in.
the thing is, emotions are not there for us to get rid of. They're for us to process.
Right.
And like,
It's supposed to inform how you're supposed to react.
Yes.
So when you get
Yeah, it
in
makes me
a
feel like
situation.
more like, oh, well now I have to process this. It's not like it's helping me process. It's like now there is a new thing.
to weep is to enter into an experience, and like,
Yes.
when we're called to, it's to enter into our brethren's suffering and to be there with them. But it is also a way to expel pain, like to cry and to express emotion, is particularly pain, is to be free of it. And so there's the both two things happening there. It could be one or it could be the other. And then tears of joy is also expressing and experiencing and not even being free, but sitting with that
Sounds
joy.
more like an embrace,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to joy.
Well,
Seems
and
like
also
crying is always an overflow of
Yeah,
emotion.
your
It's not
emotion
necessarily
is-
getting rid of it. It's just releasing
yeah.
pressure.
That
and it
sometimes literally.
can be a relief, but also I think it kind of depends on whether or not you have a solution.
Yeah.
Sometimes in
Yeah.
the crying process, you recognize the fact that it will never be fixed.
But
in
then
this
crying
world.
is the solution.
Yes, and then you just cry and you know that Jesus is crying with you. But in other times, though, it's like through the process of actually sitting with the knowledge that it is sad and sitting with the sadness, you then go through the process of realizing that either A, you can't fix it and that's okay, or B, it's already fixed and you need to acknowledge the grief and acknowledge the fact that
It still
it is
hurts.
grief.
Yeah.
And then you can move on and it is relieving.
Yeah, I was kind of going back to my book recommendations, I think it really depends whether it's a cathartic moment or like just a really tragic moment. And two of those books I recommended are like, one is on one spectrum, one is on the other, where Leela is about a woman who grew up with like a terrible life filled with, you know, her parents doing drugs and all these other things, and ends up coming to the faith through a pastor who she ends up marrying. But the other book, yeah, sorry. The books are more character based. They're more character based than plot based, so it's really. But the other one is about someone who is kind of the opposite experience, or was raised in the faith but fell away from it and you know, made a suicide attempt. And there's a very sad moment, part of the towards the end of that book, where his father has died and his sister is. He's leaving basically for the last time. And that was definitely the opposite. It's not a cathartic kind of grief whatsoever. So it really depends on the kind of media, whether it's, for me, whether it's a helpful process to cry or whether it's not really it's more.
And that is the kind of book that makes me angry cry. Because you're like, Lord, this kind of story doesn't tell your story. Because God's story, like there are those painting with dark, like Mr. Cooper was talking about earlier. Like, it is painting with dark, and God does tell those stories, but they're not the kind of story that encourages you, they're that kind of story that pushes you forward into pursuing righteousness and pursuing hope and pursuing Him. They're the kind of story that makes you just sit there with the darkness, and you're just in the darkness.
That sort of kind of brings me to a different question, but that sort of depends if you're looking at it in the terms of the author's whole body of work or a specific book. And I was wondering what you thought about that, because I had an idea for a book that it's a tragedy. Okay. And like you're saying, I kind of, inspired partly by things you said, I didn't really want it to end there because I don't want to have, you know, a not helpful ending. But also that's just where the book ends. Like, I can't think of any way of changing the ending. But I can think of, you know, the two sequel books and making a trilogy out of it where it's, you know, it's redemptive and hopeful in the end. And what do you think about that, where a single book might not have that redemptive ending, but the trilogy does?
100%, because there are seasons in your life that don't have the redemptive ending yet, because there are times when we fall prey to sin, there are times when other people do, there are times when there doesn't feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, which is when you're called to hold fast to the promises of God, when you're called to cling to them desperately and cling to Him and acknowledge the fact that He is holding fast to you, but you don't always see the light at the end of the tunnel in those seasons.
Yeah, but your readers might only read the one book that doesn't have
their problem. I was going to follow that and say I am of the opinion that the whole truth ought to be accessible. And what that means is that, and this is in the context, so for example, my pastor does a great job of starting a sermon with saying all of the things that might be bad or painful to hear, but finishing it with the gospel. And the same thing, I think, ought to be true when we are writing literature, that the whole thing ought to be accessible. That, yes, there is tragedy, but the end of the story is always hope. And so if we end a story with, it's just terrible, and especially if the sequels are not accessible immediately, you're leaving people with this hole that they can't fill. And especially if they're coming in with no context for where we're coming from, where we know the whole truth and we have the gospel. But if someone's coming in and they don't have that, all they're hearing is this tragedy and this pain, and then that's driving them closer to the darkness and farther from the truth and the light.
Reasons why I hate grimdark.
Amen. Which I was gonna say something not as well spoken as what you just said, but basically saying, I think if you're going to write a tragedy as a Christian, you need an underlying plot thread that is hopeful. That carries through.
I was going to ask, what do we think about tragedy? Because like Shakespearean tragedies are, you know, can be really brilliantly written, but they end, and you're just standing. Sometimes, literally, in the case of Hamlet, you're just standing in a pile of bodies. Like, what was the point of this?
And I think that that's telling a pointless story, and therefore they should not be told.
Again, I think it's good to tell stories of tragedy. I think it's important to tell the truth, because the truth is we live in a dark and fallen world.
And the truth is, in a case like Hamlet,
we follow it up with, there is hope, there's a bright future, there's a God who loves us.
Which is why Horatio lives, I think.
Yeah. So, like, there are stories that have, like, you are writing a brilliant story that carries a lot of darkness, but there's still a hopeful ending.
Amen.
And I think that there ought to be, I actually think there ought to be more stories like that. They get really, really dark, but have a light, because that is the truth of our entire world.
Well, especially since
I agree.
hopeful endings seem a lot more satisfying to me after there's been such a long, either a search for the hope or the journey to get where they arrive in the end. Because I am certainly of the opinion that you can have tragedy at the beginning, you can have tragedy everywhere in the middle, you can have tragedy up until 5 minutes before your ending if you want, but there absolutely must be hope to that ending, or you completely told the purpose of the story.
And it doesn't have to be like the full conclusion of, and
No.
we all go to heaven. It's not
Certainly
that.
not.
It has to be, though, that there is a bright future, because that's
Yeah.
the truth. We have a bright future, even if the moment we're in feels so heavy and dark.
Or the
Even
light
if it's
has to
just
come
the
out
promise
in the
of the
future.
future.
Yeah.
There's I was just going to say, so you were talking about, I think someone mentioned Hamlet, but I think there's a difference between telling a tragedy, like, just to be depressing and tragic, but there's also, like, kind of warning stories. Like, not every story ends well. Like,
Not on this earth.
on this earth, but and even for people who never turn to God or turn to Jesus, like, there is judgment and there are consequences. So telling those stories isn't necessarily wrong, like, even though it ends badly for the character. I might question centering it around that character.
That's
a good point.
Yeah.
I want to sort of follow up on that, but you go first.
Martha.
Oh,
Martha, speak.
have any of you ever done the Songkeeper Chronicles?
I've heard of them, but I haven't
They're
read them.
really good, and the first book and the second book both end in a very dark place. And the third book's ending is like this huge revival point.
Interesting.
And all the characters get, like, all of them get either judged or redeemed. And it's
Interesting.
a really cool idea, I think, because most of the stories, like, some of them stay good all the way through, but, like, every character in that story goes through a trial. A big one. Not just like, oh, this happens and it was hard, but they got through it. No, they go through a huge trial, are tested time and time again, and then there's a huge revival at the end. And it was one of my favorite books to read, and I remember bawling at the end of it. It was just like,
And I love seeing, actually, because the truth is, we are weak and we are fallen and we will make mistakes. I hate seeing stories where the main protagonist is just perfect. Like, they're out here to save the world. Now, it's good to have, I guess, quote-unquote Jesus figures, but no one will be Jesus.
Right.
So it kind of sucks to see any character other than Christ portrayed as perfect, because they're
so good.
and then the writer themselves are going to input accidentally character flaws.
Yep.
Such as pride, greed, lust, and they're going to do it like they don't know that they're doing it, but it comes out that way. And so it's frustrating to see characters that just don't quote unquote make mistakes. It gets annoying to see, because you know that they're just as human as you are.
Amen.
And they ought to be portrayed as real people.
Fallible.
I gotta disagree with you guys. I got an unpopular opinion.
Okay, let's go.
I'll read you one of my favorite short stories in the entire world about Heman the Ezrahite. O Lord God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry. My soul is full of troubles. My life draws near to Sheol. I'm counted among those who go down to the pit. I'm a man who has no strength, like one set loose among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. You put me in the depths of the pit, regions dark and deep. You have caused my companions to shun me. You've made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. Is your steadfast love declared in the grave, or your faithfulness in Abaddon? Are your wonders known in the darkness, or your righteousness in the land of forgetfulness? Your wrath has swept over me. Your dreadful assaults destroy me. They surround me like a flood all day long. They close in on me together. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. The end. That's all we know about Heman the Ezrahite.
But
So,
I think because that's in the context of it's in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
It's in the context of a greater story.
Right.
So we know for a fact that this guy might have had a really sucky life.
Yeah.
But
It seems like.
it's in the context of a redeemed world
And
and
like,
a redeemed people.
That is
And-
true.
yeah.
And
I was going to say, with our worldview, if we're going to write a very tragic story or something that's very dark, it needs to end with some type of vindication. It cannot just end abruptly with death all over. There needs to be some figure that is objectively good.
some reminder that this man might be gone. He, the Androhite, might have died in his suffering, but he has gone to the bosom of Abraham.
I also think
Right.
there's a big difference between a short story and a full-length novel,
That I
because
agree with.
we are called to meditate on what is good and what is right and what is true and what is lovely, and tragedies on the end are none of those things, and you will be meditating on them and you'll be thinking about them for weeks afterward, and that is unhealthy, unhelpful, and arguably could be sinful, depending on how you do it. So
Yeah. I also think this is a better example of the context of striving with the Lord in a productive sense of he's going to God and saying, hey, this really sucks. And I know I've done that. I've gone, God, why is this all happening? And instead of running away and running into the darkness, he's at least seeking the Lord in his
sitting before the Lord.
It's a righteous
it's
complaint.
bringing it to God instead of saying, I don't want anything to do with God anymore.
It's talking about all of the bad stuff, but in a righteous manner.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is why it's even included in the Bible, is that it's part of a greater story, and it's a good example of a man going through a hard thing and doing the right thing.
Solid contribution.
The reason I bring it up and say that is not to say that no bad stories with sad endings are good. I don't think that's the case, and I think in this period of history, now that we have the gospel delivered to us, it is much more important that we have more and an overwhelming amount of the stories be ones with good endings, where there's righteousness, where there's retribution, where there's vindication of what's good and right. So I'm not saying we should all go out and write sad stories or anything like that, or that anybody should, really. But it is important, I think, to remember that episodes of unvindication remind us of the incompleteness of this world. If you look at Abraham's life, he gets these incredible promises that we get to receive, but he dies with basically 2 sons, more or less, in the covenant, and the one who's supposed to pass on the covenant wants to give it to Esau, and Esau is out there being a pagan, and Abraham dies. And that's all we know of Abraham until later on when you start to see the kingdom of Israel. So it's not bad necessarily, I don't think, to have episodes within your stories, or even
Characters.
or even maybe not a full novel, but maybe a full novel within a series. Again, I like what you said about people having access to the complete truth.
Yes.
There was a long time when humanity did not have access to the complete truth at all.
Well, I would say that's actually not true, because I think in every case they had access to the correct amount of truth.
Yeah.
Like Israel before God, and the opportunities that they had to access God, even if it wasn't the same access that we have now, they still had the full truth that they needed in that time. So they still could choose to leave the entire, city of Israel, the whole, I've lost it words. They could leave Israel. They could abandon that. They could go to other cities that are worshiping pagan gods, but they also had the opportunity to go before the Lord and to live a godly life. And they knew that he was a good God who was going to lead them in all the right ways, and that he had done that. There's the reason that we have all the feasts in the Old Testament.
Amen.
That they were celebrating, they were still accessing the fact that this God, their creator, had continued to lead them in all of the right ways. And the full truth was that if they abandoned him, it was going to be worse.
Yeah.
And they were constantly reminding themselves of his promises and his truth and what he had done in their stories and everything they were talking about.
Or else,
Which is
Even when they were going through
purpose
hard
of
things.
they
storytelling.
had a responsibility to, which we also
They had a
have.
command.
Yeah.
Which
And
we
also,
do have.
like, even in David's story, he repeatedly goes back to, I know that you are the God who did all these things. And we're going through this hard series, but this hard, part of our life, but I know that you did all these good things.
I know this is
This
are
is who you
this
are.
God.
So they still had the access to the full story of whatever their full story was, just like we do today.
Amen.
So
Amen.
I would actually say that in any case, you have to have access to the full story for it to be a good story.
So I would say what they had then was hope. We have vindication. Christ was the first one to get vindication in the sense that he never sinned and he was murdered unjustly, And so God overturned that judgment. He said, no, that's not right. You get to live. He's resurrected, and he's, put at the seat of all authority and power and everything in heaven and earth is under him. And we do that in smaller ways because we're not totally innocent, but we're declared innocent in Christ. And all those people in the Old Testament were declared innocent in Christ because they believed in him. And even though they suffered because they did sin and they were under the curse.
So do we.
Exactly, that's true. They didn't quite have the vindication yet.
Right, but again, in any case, it doesn't have to necessarily be the full story, as in, we don't have to, insert the entire Bible when we publish a book. But we still have to have an example of hope and light.
We need truth.
Exactly.
And I think that's why I struggle with Flannery O'Connor stories.
Yes.
Because, I'm the church in Louisiana, the pastor there has done a series actually on Flannery O'Connor that I'm very, very, very slowly working through. Because,
How did that get there?
because I forget to listen to things if they're not stories, but
But Flannery O'Connor.
but all of her stories are so dark and you have to think through them, and there's nothing wrong with having to think through a story, but if I just read it and I'm just like, oh, that grandfather just smashed his granddaughter's head with a rock. And that's where it ends, and I'm like, what?
That is definitively not giving us the whole truth.
It's and I feel like it should be a little more hopeful or something.
That doesn't end with vindication or hope.
Yeah,
It just ends.
She's making a point with these stories, but at the same time, I think they're too dark still, even for a person of faith.
Well, I think it's appropriate to include violence.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that. Just and then they end.
Again, no light, no hope.
And I'm like, there's probably is if you dive into it, but I don't.
The truth of these stories is that people are terrible.
It should be easily accessible truth.
Which shouldn't be the only truth being acknowledged.
Yeah,
and she doesn't just do that because she does talk about other themes, but just it's.
Well, and here's
too
the
much.
thing. The reason I say easily accessible is that people have access to the truth, but if you have to understand all the fancy words and all of the fancy terminology to understand what Christ did for us or the fact that we have hope, it's not accessible as it was when Christ went to the people and was ministering to people on hills and saying, I am the bread of life, and teaching them that there was hope. He was in person with them, teaching them what they needed to know. Whereas if the only access to truth that you have is a pastor who is just using all of the Calvinistic terms and not actually getting to what those actually mean for the people, he's not using layman's. You have to use layman's terms to actually
define your terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's times for fancy talk, but that's more when you're talking to peers that understand it.
Yeah, that's for nerds.
It's us trying to cover.
It's for T-Ray and I.
Yeah, have fun with that.
It's for the theologically mature. Paul's messages in the epistles are much more in-depth and complicated, but his sermons to Gentiles, when he would go and convert them initially, were Jesus is the king of this whole world, and he's about to round up every single one of you and smoke all of you.
It's the meat versus the milk.
Yeah.
He talks about that in his epistles to the Gentiles, is here's the things we're learning right now, the little things, we're going to build on that a little bit at a time.
Right.
But we're starting with the little things.
And then he goes into Hebrews and he starts talking about Melchizedek and stuff like that. So it's for people who already are familiar. It's exactly what you said. People who are just getting started, you don't need to have somebody who's coming to church for the first time be like, oh, let's talk about all of the soteriology you need to know in order to go to heaven.
Hard pass.
Well, and that was really, it's a whole nother conversation, but yes.
Yes.
And that is a good time to
It is 12:30. We are over time, but I think every minute of it was great. I think we ended on a really good note, actually. I think that was a solid, not even a dovetail, it was a solid change of subject from before T-Ray. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. I love bringing in all these people. This is great.
I used a
What do we do?
selfie wood burning gun.
We do need
And honestly,
we do need to take a selfie, but we are not singing the doxology like you did at the end of that video.
So.
All right.